Hello and welcome to Small Cap Nation. I'm Jane King at the NasDaq market site in Times Square. And with me today, Tim Morris, the Chief Financial Officer at AcelRx, and also Gina Ford, the Vice President of Commercial Strategy. So thank you for coming.
Thank you, Jane.
And so tell us, that AcelRx trades on the NasDaq, ticker symbol ACRX. You focus on therapies for treatments of acute pain. So Tim, let's start with you. Can you give me just an overview of the company?
Sure. The company was started in 2005. Our founding and chief medical officer was Pamela Palmer. She's an anesthesiologist by training, taught at UCSF, and she noticed that there was a need for a better delivery and a better morphine for acute pain in the hospital setting. So she came up with a better opioid, which is sufentanil, and came up with a very unique delivery system, which we call Disuvia. And so we've done multiple phase 3 studies for it. Most importantly, we've got funding from the military of about $22 million to date. They were actually looking to replace their auto-injectors of morphine on the battlefield. And so we developed a single-dose application of sublingual sufentanil. This is the product right here.
Wow, okay.
And it's really initially meant for medics on the battlefield, but we think the commercial application is emergency medicine and hospitals. So anywhere where you use an IV application of morphine right now, you should be able to use Disuvia.
Okay, so what would be the key markets? I mean, you just mentioned some, but what would be the ones you're initially addressing?
Gina?
Yeah, Jane, so we really do think that emergency medicine, ERs, ambulances may be a proper use for Disuvia, but we're also considering other applications like in the hospital, so severe painful procedures, post-op pain after short stay or major surgeries, as well as applications in ambulatory surgeries or painful procedures in physician offices. So all told, looking at the total marketplace for Disuvia from the point of injury or accident or a painful procedure or surgery, we think there's about 91 million patients annually that suffer from acute, moderate, severe pain.
Okay.
In total, we think that's about a $1.1 billion market.
Wow, okay. So Tim, you mentioned two products in the company's pipeline. So we've seen Disuvia, also Zelviso. So bring us up to date on the clinical data on those two products.
Certainly. Disuvia first, we've completed 4 studies in total for Disuvia that we will use to submit for our new drug application to the FDA. Those studies look at a variety of post-operative pain, either a bunionectomy or some kind of laparoscopic abdominal. We'd also done an open label study in the emergency room because those patients are very important to treat. We've also done a post-operative study in older and sicker patients. And all of those studies showed statistical significance and reduction in pain scores. It's important when you remember, if anyone's been in pain before, you have an assessment between 0 to 10, and what we look to do is reduce those scores. In the ER study, for example, the baseline pain score was an 8, which is very high.
Okay.
And with one dose in 60 minutes, we're able to reduce that person's pain score by about 3 points.
Wow.
So it's relatively significant. So
Sure.
all told, we have about 900 patients that we've studied, and that should be the basis for our application for approval in the United States.
Okay.
Now, Zelviso is a product that's actually approved in Europe. It uses the same molecule, essentially the same formulation, just a slightly different strength. It's actually put in a more sophisticated delivery device that's really meant to replace IV PCA morphine or patient-controlled analgesia. So if a patient is going to be in the hospital for at least 2 days, they can get, instead of getting hooked up to an IV drip or an IV push, they can get a machine by their bedside where they can dispense and dose themselves. So we have one more study left to do in the United States before we submit that NDA. But Disuvia will go in first, and we'll look at Zelviso as a follow-on product.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so Gina, let's spend some time talking about the commercialization of the products that we've talked about here, the emergency room, a targeted market. Why is that an important market for you and a cornerstone of your marketing and sales strategy?
Sure, absolutely. Emergency medicine is fraught with patients who have moderate severe pain. That's why most patients go to emergency room, is because of pain. And what we know today is typically those patients are placed on an IV dose of morphine. What happens with those patients then is they are often required to have a bed, they are required to have additional nursing time, additional resources necessary to put that patient on IV morphine. What we believe is that Disuvia can replace that product and keep those patients out of a bed, make them what our KOLs call a vertical patient. So you can keep a patient in a chair, you administer this sublingually, and the patient can then be out of pain, as Tim mentioned, within an hour.
Okay, and what is the charge for Desuvia?
So we think in our model, our revenue model, we've issued a price of $45 a dose. We think that's significant. We talked to some of our customers who think $50 might limit some access. So we want to keep it around $45. We haven't done any formal pricing studies, but that's significant because a single dose of IV morphine, like we just discussed, the pump, the drug, the nursing time, can be about $140 for a first dose. So even if a patient has to have 2 doses of Desuvia at $45, we are still beating IV morphine costs today.
Okay, now doesn't every patient who comes to an ER get hooked to an IV already automatically?
Well, we've done extensive market research, Jane, and found out that that's actually not the case. And our physicians are telling us they would prefer that not every patient get an IV.
Okay.
Typically today, for pain, again, if it's severe enough, that's their only choice, is to provide an IV opioid. But in situations where patients may be difficult to stick, 1 in 10 patients are difficult to stick, or there are certain conditions like obesity or diabetes that also are difficult to stick. So we think physicians may try the product in those type of patients, but eventually patients that absolutely don't need an IV, one with a fracture, a dislocated joint, or abdominal pain like kidney stones, shouldn't need an IV at all, and we have a product in Desuvia that those patients could use.
Okay, so Tim, you're the Chief Financial Officer, so let's talk about the balance sheet.
Sure.
Give us some context about how your company compares with peers.
Sure. We ended the year 2016 with about $80 million of cash. We don't make any money yet. We don't have any revenues because the products aren't quite approved, but we currently use about $10 million a quarter. So we believe we have sufficient funding to get through approval. We expect a decision from the FDA in the 4th quarter of this year, so that's enough. We do expect to potentially raise some additional funding to help Gina and her team launch the product and build up commercial infrastructure.
Okay, and what are the milestones that you have for the coming quarters, for the coming year, 2017? What are your goals?
So in 2017, they're fairly simple. We expect the near-term milestone in the 1st quarter of the FDA acceptance of our new drug application. So in other words, we'll get official notification from the FDA that the application we've submitted is sufficient, contains all the information, and then they can begin their review. From that, they will set what's known as a PDUFA date. A PDUFA date is basically the date on which they will respond. Hopefully they respond with approval, and that should be sometime in the 4th quarter. We also anticipate filing a marketing authorization application in Europe, the equivalent of looking for approval in the European market. We expect to do that in the first half of this year as well. We also expect that the FDA will hold an advisory committee meeting over the summer to talk about Desuvia. That tends to be a fairly interesting event. And then lastly, if all goes well, we'll get approval sometime potentially in the 4th quarter. So those are the big milestones for 2017.
Yeah, and those sound like some biggies too. It's going to be a very busy year for you. Best of luck, and thank you for sharing the story of AcelRx. And I know a lot of people, this is a necessary treatment, especially with the opioid issues that we've seen. So it's very key. So best of luck to you. Thank you, Tim and Gina, for joining us today. And thank you as well for joining us on Small Cap Nation. I'm Jane King at the NASDAQ Market Site. And for more information about small companies doing some interesting things, you can go to smallcapnation.com.